Good evening, ladies. I am so excited to get back with you on this last week's or last session of homework. And I'm going to dig right in. My timing and setup may be a little different because I'm actually meeting at the office right now as we're gearing up to be in service this coming Sunday. So I hope to see you there, or at least online if you're not comfortable with being there. I totally get that. So whatever you need to do, whatever your way to honor God and to honor your convictions, let's do that. So anyhow, what we're focusing on in Philippians, the last session with Joe Saxton, on page 57 and 58, that's where our homework is. And there's just a bunch of questions around the last chapter 4. There's verses 10 through 13 there. And the verses, one is super familiar. We can do Paul's talked about he can do all things through Christ, but it's so good that we're learning it kind of in context. But what he's talking about before that, he's talking about contentment. And that's really the thrust of this section, this day of homework. He really asks some questions that are super good. So I highly recommend, even if you don't do all of it, if you'll just sit with like the middle question on page 58, asking in what instances can it be difficult for you to be content? These are really good questions to ask ourselves. These are really important things to know of ourselves. And sometimes I think we're afraid to ask the question because we're afraid what's going to be in there. And I've kind of talked about this before, that don't judge your answers. It's okay. What if your answer isn't godly or right? Well, at least you know where you are. It's like not finding out that you have a disease doesn't make the disease stop. You know, like we know people that won't go to the doctor because they fear finding out that they're going to have some disease and they're afraid of what it might be. And for a moment, that's okay. Like to take a moment and be like, oh, I'm scared. But we push through that because we know we can't even find a cure until we know what it is that ails us. This is the same with our spiritual life. So that question there, in what instances can it be difficult for you to be content? And then she adds to that, and what makes it hard? And, you know, those were really, really good questions. So I hope if you get a moment, or maybe you make a moment, we all have moments, and we really do get to decide what to do with them. So, you know, whatever that looks like, go ahead and it's fine to have time that you're down and enjoying yourself, but it's also enjoyable to do these things. So make time for that. So with that, on the topic of contentment, I just have some questions I want to ask you. So they're kind of like questions where just kind of a little rhetorical. So think about these. So in light of contentment and wrapping up, I want to give you a few thoughts here. So I'm just going to read these questions to you that I wrote down. Would you run the race if you knew you could win? Would you run if you knew your body was capable? So run a race. Would you let go of control if you knew your spouse, coworker, child, friend, if you knew they were going to be okay, would you just back off and not try to control? Would you be thankful and generous if you knew you would always have enough? Thankful and generous with your time, your finances, your giving of yourself, your friendship, your maybe overlooking other people's issues and just not having to right every wrong. Would you do that if you knew there would always be enough time and enough emotional and spiritual bandwidth? Would you step out and do that thing that you have dreamed of if you knew you had what it took? Would you do that? Would you be the bigger person, give away kindness and love to those who are not good to you, and treat them right if you knew someone would right the wrong and come to your defense? Would you just let it go knowing that someone would take care of you and your needs would be met? So guess what? As you probably already know, we do know. We can know. Knowing God's unchanging character has effect on all that we do, all that we are, and all that we have. When He is bigger, what we are focusing on than what we're focused on, we're content. So I wrote this down and I let this sit here because I just wanted to let it be for a minute. And I started, because I really felt like this was what God was showing me. We do know the end. See, Paul could be content while in prison, whether he had every need met or no needs met. And he's telling us that he was content and he can do all things through Christ. So it was like all of these hurdles that he had, he knew through Christ, he wins. He always wins. In every situation, he wins. It's for good. It works out. It might the suffering might last for a time, but he knew the end result was his win and God's glory. So then you can be completely content. Content you're cared for. Content that God's taking care of you in every way, your needs and your hopes and your dreams. So you see, I really believe, and I believe this because it's what he's working in me, that our greatest contentment will be found when we rest in the knowledge that God's unchanging character is able. And that means we have got to trade our control for contentment, or we will trade our contentment for control. We can't have control of the situation and be content, because as soon as it gets out of our control, our contentment is gone. As soon as things don't go the way we expect, our contentment can be gone. So what we're doing is, by being content, he said he had a plumb line that anchored him to the truth that all things were going to work for him. Even if it was horrible for a time, he knew the end of the story. We win. You win. Your relationships will get better. Your situations will be better. But this only happens, the thing happens, God is faithful, but we must partner and believe him if we want the contentment in the process. Because here's the thing. We live and we die. That is the way it works in this earth. And then we live with Christ. Okay, so that's the deal. You can't escape that. But we get to decide if we want to take him at his word and live content in the living, in the space between now and seeing him face to face. Contentment is ours when we remember that through Christ, we can do all things. We can look like Jesus in any situation we encounter. I love you. I pray your day is going great. And I pray that your roots are growing deep in Jesus' word. Love you guys. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye.